Welcome back to the cybernetic communism conversation. I'm Yohanan Ben Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness, crying out for a technological New Jerusalem. Emphasis on the technological, as you would like to say. There's not much point talking about a new world, better society if you're going to cling to things that would tend to make that less than feasible, and that would tend to include basically every cultural property that you cling to now, some worse than others, some more clung to than others. One that's clung to quite a lot would tend to be religious literalism, which is not sufficiently distinct from some thing else, superstition. But superstition is quite different from religious literalism and cultural factors along those lines, in that uh, it is not as bad. Uh, Religion is a tool of the bourgeoisie to keep workers from realizing that better world. So when somebody says to me that religion can be a part of that better world, I say that they have not thought too clearly on these subjects, or that they are just superstitious idiots. Um, this yes, name Yohanan Ben Zion was something that I started using some years ago, and I think it still serves that purpose. But I don't know that some reference specifically to Judeo-Christian things is absolutely the best choice. I don't know what the absolute best choice for someone would have been otherwise. I could have had a nom de guerre that was a alphanumeric designation of no evocation to anyone. That um, uh, but I'm kind of forced to, if not embrace, work within the constraints of language people use, which tends to be the language of the Eurocentric paradigm, which tends to be the language of this thing of the Western world that I'd rather just as well be completely done with, the Judeo-Christian mythos. But there you have it. I've been reading the work of Enzo Traverso, Italian Marxist-Leninist thinker of great renown. If you're a Marxist-Leninist, he's pretty good. And the most recent of these works that I've been reading got me thinking about the condition of the material condition of the world in centuries past, and the condition of the world today. And most people will tend to focus on the ways in which this world has gotten better in the West. Don't I don't think that the billion people on the planet who never have food or water or proper shelter or health care tend to think that way. Um, but the more pampered do. And of those billion whose lives are tragically cut short, a short number of years, there are many billions more who suffer from those effects to a lesser degree. And this is a world where something like 100 people have nearly all the wealth. And if that wealth were more properly distributed, there would be basically no people in such dire straits. That people, for example, in the global south who never have the right kind of food or clean water, an increasingly serious problem for all of us, and die a short number of years later. That's not an act of God. That's not a holdover from time immemorial. It's not some factor which we could not change. That is a feature of this world where we allow billionaires and mega millionaires and ruling elites to control so much of the resources. And I use the word eruption in this title as opposed to revolution. Eruption is a little more of a general term, and it's one that if you read works like Traverso or many others, you'll hear from time to time. So it doesn't to distinguish between a full revolution that occurs to transition from a bourgeois state to state socialism or some other kind of revolution, and the riot, which should be correctly seen as a move toward some revolutionary outcome. And only a person who is more interested in the private wealth of those killers of Earth than in and maintaining the system that maintains them, than in actual human beings, to seize the riot as something more nefarious. The difference in this world, delineated quite easily by yourself, thinking of the 1800s, and the world of today, that Traverso and others had gotten me thinking of so much. You have the tools at your disposal to describe the ways in which the world is better, and you do that more than you should. But the thing that you do less than you should is describing the distinct ways in which it is worse. And that could be boiled down to a few statements. It is worse because of a phenomenon like a CIA-run world, dropping neocolonial noose around the neck of the world, such that billions of people are immiserated, and a military-industrial complex. U.S. again, the problem, not 100% of the problem is the U.S., but enough of the problem is the U.S. that you could say that the world would not be dying without this U.S. military-industrial complex having come into existence. And so the U.S. military-industrial complex is one of the things big enough to be said to be in the top 5 of things that are wrong with the world today relative to centuries past. Similarly, part of what I just said, but bears repeating, the planet is dying. That's not a joke. It's not something you would wave away as you do, I know. You say, Ben, you're talking about things that I'm well aware of. I don't think I believe that you're well enough aware of them, right? Because where's that eruption? Where's that appropriate response? If you were the good person that you tell me you are, you and I, listening to this, haven't had that conversation necessarily, but I've had that conversation with enough people to know that there's basically no one doing this, right? What I'm doing right now, or in general, shouting these things at anyone who will listen, that's not enough. That's not eruption. That's a step in the right direction that almost no one's taking, but even that does not reflect an appropriate response. An appropriate response to the planet dying, the end of the species, is for the species, or some significant part of the species, to come together to stop that from happening by any means necessary, by whatever means are most appropriate to dealing with that exigency. And that brings us to the other less than commonplace usage in this title. The title was Vibe Coding to Global Eruption. You could have just as well said Vibe Coding to World Revolution, which was the title that I first typed. But then I changed it because this concept of revolution is one that's been Disneyfied or just made less than meaningful in its usages in ways that would tend to ignore the eruption overwhelmingly, ways that would tend to ignore the eruption, the necessary element. And so vibe coding to a true world revolution. What is that? Yeah, I was reading a piece last night describing a rather elaborate, and I won't get into the details, partly because I don't have notes of it in front of me, a rather elaborate way in which video content creators can be using AI agents to change the nature of their work product and simplify that. And this is unfortunately occurring in a for-profit, even far-right neoliberal framework that I'm none too fond of. But nevertheless, the use of AI agents for a group of people is not something that I am inclined to dismiss. There's in the last 48 hours, there's been a sizable backlash against the use of the Japanese animator of some renown of Ghibli Studios, which when I visited Tokyo, I went to their museum, and it was nice. The backlash, of course, is not against Ghibli Studios itself, but against appropriating the aesthetic of Ghibli Studios by a specific company, OpenAI, but other for-profit art generators using this advanced technology are now able to appropriate this aesthetic as well. And I haven't tested to see if the open source ones are able to at this point. But I am almost 100% certain that you can go to an open source AI art generator like those available associated with DeepSeek or Qwen, Qwen. So you can go to Qwen, and because that aesthetic is not so difficult, create that style in an open source kind as well. And in doing so, you would be doing less of a crime than that is being correctly complained about across the internet today. And that is an important point. I've been watching a film series. I haven't finished it yet. I don't generally encourage people to watch art, but I sometimes will put something like this on while I'm eating. So what I've been watching while I'm eating lately is a show called Mussolini, Son of the Century. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to people for the same reason I wouldn't recommend almost anything else other than agitation, propaganda, or art that truly raises consciousness, which is this would tend to, in more visible ways than most things even, make one empathize with the incoherent worldview and violent worldview of the fascist, of the imperial fascist, of the capitalist over the socialist and communist, the people willing to fight for a humane and sustainable world, in a world that will soon be dead without that fight. So people that have not immersed themselves in the thought, in the literature of that specific set of worldviews, liberation and revolution of the more legitimate kind, I really don't tend to recommend almost anything other than works directly related to that. And so you'll forgive me for making mention of this, but I was struck by something that, of course, I've been well aware of for many years, which is that um, this wide range of bourgeois worldviews, which are not distinct from fascism relative to the liberation worldviews, and this, of course, is a nominally fascist worldview, that of Mussolini and Mussolini, man of the century, and the story. It's a story about fascists. Um, it's an incoherent worldview, right? Why do they hate socialists so much? Why do they hate revolution so much? They can quite nearly be forgiven relative to you for fearing revolution because they were not living at the edge of this era of runaway overheating caused by the US run capitalist climate apocalypse leading to the extinction of humankind. So the risk for them was, in a certain sense, more significant, their fear of revolution. But of course, if you know anything about history, you know that Mussolini was a creature of Western intelligence. British intelligence came to him and said, here's a briefcase full of money. You used to be a socialist. We understand that you're a little disgruntled with socialists now. We'd like you to try this secret third thing. Who knows? Maybe it'll be good. And thus fascism was born. And that has been true of every thing that's fallen short of legitimate liberation and revolution. That it's corrupted by the influences of private wealth and the ruling elites and empire, which is a significant enough problem that it shouldn't be waved away as, oh, well, financial capital itself is a primary contradiction. So empire is just a product of that. If you say something like that, I don't think you're thinking too clearly again. You're talking about maybe another century, not the moment that you're living in, where empire, pretty specifically, the US empire, pretty specifically the military-industrial complex, is causing the death of humankind. And so this incoherence is seen in my opinion, in this response to the AI-generated art, right? Like a person who is defending high culture, that's a person who would just as soon slit your throat, right? But not all of those people are defending high culture. But I would say, if you're not talking pretty specifically about an activist agenda or to help artists, but just talking about how artists are maltreated, you're doing something pretty decidedly liberal rather than revolutionary. But the AI art backlash just doesn't recognize that there is something like an open source model that was developed, any number of models that were developed with less resource usage. It lumps those in with the criminal, for-profit criminal, and less resource usage and little or no exploitation. So it's an incoherent worldview. It's essentially rejecting revolution by lumping it in with its opposite. And you say, oh, Ben, is open source as an open source machine learning product, open source large language model, really revolution? Well, not yet. Not yet. You would be right about that. But there has not been this thing that mimics human behavior to the degree that a tremendous amount of labor-related or bourgeois-related, a work product, could be developed by one person. There has not been this thing that is the essential, quite near endless duplication of things rather like human beings in human history. And if that continues to be an overwhelmingly a bourgeois phenomenon, which I would not argue that it is. Um, um, Humane and sustainably developed open source large language models, which could be called proto agents, not full agents, representing that full workforce multiplication at present, but close enough that they could be scaled to have that effect now. Have been existing in this world more and more. That's more the story of 2025 than the exploits of the for-profit machine learning concerns. So you have DeepSeek being a bigger story than OpenAI in most respects in 2025. And more importantly, whether it's a bigger story in the idiot echo chamber of the West, it's a bigger story when you have a billion people outside the global North making use of it. Perhaps even some of them to legitimately revolutionary ends. So I was going to talk to my. I don't have always the ability to use a locally hosted LLM of the strength that I would use, so I would use the kind that I referred to, those of more of the open source kind, but web-based, like Quen or DeepSeek. And but not always. I do have a local one that I am able to use at times, and that is pretty strong. So I woke up this morning and thought I'm going to talk to my robot about making some art, and I even thought about using this thing which has gone viral and gotten a lot of hate, this Ghibli style. Although I thought maybe I would combine and simplify the Ghibli style with Pusheen style, and make something that at first glance might look to be a Ghibli thing, but at second glance would look to be something slightly more stylized, and and simpler, and to describe this actual phrase, vibe coding to world revolution. So I was going to brainstorm with my chatbot maybe 100 concepts for what this phrase, vibe coding to world revolution, would look like, and then further press when I found one that I like, to ask it to give me a full prompt that would allow me to produce with the same Quen a piece of art that would be impactful in the way that I described. I would say that if you're not doing this with art, trying to raise consciousness or agitate, anything that you're doing that relates to culture or human activity, that's not doing those two things on a world that's going to die if we don't see a tremendous amount of agitation, then ultimately eruption toward a humane and sustainable economic system. What are you doing with your life? Right? You're defending bourgeois things. You know, what is art in the United States? It's fucking garbage. Are you really defending Western art? Like, what's wrong with you? There's virtually nothing that rises to the level of what I've described. Real art. Things that would agitate and raise consciousness. Again, I know this because the planet's still fucking dying, right? If there were anything in the West that fit that description, the people would have been moved to stop this bad thing from happening. So I am hard pressed, and I would not. It's not always helpful to just dismiss everything as fascistic, right? But I do think that I will tend to not err on the side of caution there, and say that anything that has bourgeois elements to it, and just I will just be that person who does call it fascistic in a lot of contexts. What's the point? What's the point of saying, well, if you really want to understand this, you have to link to this 40-page essay that describes it at greater length. People are moved by that. You sometimes have to use the shorthand. Um, so I wouldn't tend to describe this response as something Luddite. Um, um, if I had the time to describe it for the length as I have, I think, or fascistic. And the Luddites were not fascistic. The Luddites were not specifically technophobic. The Luddites were doing something more in the spirit of this AI backlash that is trying to center working people. But the Luddites did not have a language of building um, actual labor formations or even state labor formations. They did not have labor unions or state socialism. They did not have access to understanding those things in the way that you do. There's no excuse, really, again, for you being as dumb as you are in this world where this kind of information and organization is readily at your disposal. I don't say this enough, but you should be in a labor union as a worker. That's the bare minimum of being a person who would be um, moving toward that eruption, you know, and you should be moving toward that interruption in whatever way you can, irrespective of whether you're able to be in a labor union or that kind of worker formation or not. Um, and so, you know, I'm not too impressed by the AI backlash. It reflects a level of incoherency and counter revolution that I just can't quite endorse. But I understand that it is better than this for-profit filth and bourgeois filth that is dominant in the Western world. But again, that is not the full picture, right? The theater of the United States is just garbage. To focus on the United States, you know, this is something that East Asian people living in East Asia, particularly in the Chinese sphere of influence, have understood better than maybe other people. Which is, you know, Europe is a garbage dump. The North Atlantic powers, the United States, it is a garbage dump, right? Except that it endangers China. Chinese people should not be too preoccupied with it. Don't be drawn in by a bourgeois puppet show that doesn't really reflect the reality of 8.3 billion people or the needs of 8.3 billion people. You know, the film came out in the last few hours. It's being rolled out toward a red carpet rollout, I guess, on social media, and it's a film that I won't mention by name, but it's worse than bourgeois garbage, right? It's the astroturfing of specific CIA talking point. It's a film about, quote, anti-Semitism, but of course it's not about anti-Semitism. It's about the rejection of the Zionist project and equating that rejection of violent settler colonialism with a dislike for people of a particular religion. That's a lie. Right? The people who are actually practicing that religion are not violent settler colonialists. This is more correctly a thing associated with the United States military-industrial complex than with Jewish people. And a person who would say that is, again, that's a person who just as soon slit your throat. Is that a person you want to be in a foxhole with? In a world where if we do not see the eruption of fighting toward a humane and sustainable economic system, humanity will soon be extinct. Is that a person? A Zionist? A killer of Earth? A killer of man? Is that a person you would want to be in a foxhole with? That's a person who is quite, uh, I can assure you, if you are not thus assured, a person quite on the wrong side of history in that regard and many others. Um, and uh, so this, uh, my thinking on this quote anti-Semitism film, um, as it relates to what we were just talking about a moment ago, is um, uh, there is virtually nothing in the West that's not more CIA talking point than a legitimate conversation. Just try and have legitimate conversations. It's hard to do. Just that it wasn't. I didn't come up with a better name than Yohanan Ben Zion when it would tend to reference as a nom de guerre this world of so-called Western thought. Uh, I would have liked to come up with a name that maybe reference something more to do with Mandarin or something else. Maybe inspired people in those areas, less corrupted. I only really speak one language fluently. I have had Mandarin lessons, but not nearly enough. I have had lessons in other languages, but not nearly enough. It's only this one language that me sweet sainted mother taught me. Um, um, well, I was going to drill down a little bit. Judge. I was going to drill down a little bit on how this conversation about vibe coding to world revolution relates to the the project, the cyber communist project, which is necessarily a rejection of most things Western, the most corrupt aspects of that. And another thing that it just occurred to me that doesn't come up in this conversation about the appropriation of Ghibli Studios is the Ghibli Studios, of course, is Japanese, which is a bourgeois country of criminal kind, although it's not fair to call them criminals. It's not fair to call, let's say, Indians, people of India. If you've read the works of Arundhati Roy, you've heard credible denunciations of things like Hindu nationalism. Right? But there would be no Hindu nationalism without this specific destruction of a more sustainable set of formations in India by the Eurocentric fascistic West. Right? Right? There would, like what was happening that led to Mussolini being a state fascist. Before that time, he was just crank, right? You know, writing stupid screeds and printing them off at his stupid little printing press. What led to him? Well, financial capital colluding to stop the ending of financial capital, an omnicidal force that's been well understood for hundreds of years. It's been well understood for hundreds of years that capitalism, financial capital, tends to destroy the things which it needs to survive, workers and the natural world. That's been well understood. Well, we haven't had it written on the wall in the Daniel sense of thing being writing on the wall of the impending capitalist climate apocalypse for quite so long. A truly sapient species would have been able to figure it out, the problem, on that basis, that capitalism destroys the things that it needs. A natural world, most particularly in this area. But the problem of it destroying workers is one and the same problem. this um, there's no excuse for you being as Eurocentric as you are. You say, well, listen to me. I wanted to learn about cybernetic communism, or I wouldn't be on this channel. Okay, but I know in this larger world that no one is doing this kind of proselytizing virtually. No one's figured out a way to do it more effectively than I've been doing. Um, um, of course, there are eco-communists who are better known than John Ben Zion by a country mile. But where, again, is the product of this? Where is the eruption? Where is even the slimmest maneuvering toward a sustainable world? Some reform that derives from the work of the people who purport to be trying to stop the climate apocalypse. There's none, right? The machine whirs on, and so, well, what is vibe coding? Right? I still didn't define that, and I should. Oh, I can actually see the comment now. People do that when. Thank you, David, for all of your comments. I don't always see them. In this case, I have. People do that, then get folded into traditional talking points, and everything goes back to normal again. Yes, that's true. Um, there is not an organizational basis for this necessity of any of the structural forms for this necessity for world revolution, and that is reason enough. There was something in the vein of self-criticism that I said here, which is the proselytizing. Um, I talk to people of the many hundreds on a daily basis about the need for a cyber communistic revolution, and if I could figure out how to talk to more people, I would. But this sort of thing tends to be suppressed, even by people that call themselves anti-establishment. Everybody kind of calls themselves anti-establishment. No one really knows what that means. A person who is not fighting specifically against financial capital, specifically for a humane, sustainable economic system, could not possibly be anti-establishment, right? That's just a person who has identified maybe one area, 1% of the problem, and has chosen to fixate on that, and but otherwise chosen to uphold the other 99% of the problematic factors. That would be what you would describe as a person in the U.S. who's describing themselves as anti-establishment while working to maintain the unsustainable system, the CIA-run world, the U.S. military-industrial complex-run capitalist climate apocalypse. You won't find people. Again, if there were such people in any number, it takes in this cybernetic communistic context that I've described, I think 1% of all of the people in any given field of engagement to bring about substantial revolutionary change. In studies of a more reliable kind than my admittedly anecdotal 1% cyber communistic. Yeah. So on other shows, I've described at some length how a study suggests that 3.5 to 4% of people in a specific context, let's say the context of converting a nation state from a bourgeois nation state into a state socialist form, if 3 to 4% of people become organized to that end in that country, then the state socialist form is assured. A revolutionary outcome is assured. And I have suggested that in this massified workforce multiplier context of the open source large language model work group, that number comes down. Certainly it doesn't go up as a result. It might come down, and it might come down by some order of magnitude. So 1% might be a generous number, but let's say it's still at 2 to 3%. Um, um, right? Where is this product? Right. So proselytizing would be the bare minimum of what you would be doing. No one's doing it. That's to say, agitating or raising consciousness in the most vociferous way for this livable world. Um, the eruption and working to that end is what you're doing. So people often say you shouldn't be on Twitter. You shouldn't be on Facebook. You shouldn't be on Instagram X, Y, Z. The people who say that, who are then saying because you should be working with an organization toward that eruption, those people would be correct. But anyone else who's saying that, who's not specifically giving you the better option and in your area, is just full of shit, right? The bare minimum that you could be doing is doing everything that you can to be agitating and raising consciousness toward a livable world. And but the people who are doing a better job of it as organizers, as would-be revolutionaries, there's no revolution really, would be those who are maybe not as visible to you. Um, um, that is well understood by people favorably inclined to scientific socialist, scientific communist thought and liberation and revolutionary action. It's not well understood by other people. It's just the most ordinary, but it's about 1 in 1,000 persons who even has the language to discuss this. David, because I'm able to see the comments this time, maybe I'll try to make sure that is open in the side window again. Do you have anything else you want to say? Because you sometimes make comments and I don't respond to them in real time, and then I'm not really able to place them in the way. Well, he hasn't typed anything else. He could have already typed something if he wanted to. But feel free to do that if you want. So what is vibe coding? That's something that perhaps needs a definition, although it's fairly easy for you to do a search of that. But vibe coding would be, it would require that you use some applications, and it would require that you you can vibe code very easily using twitter.com. So some of you might see this on twitter.com. People in the last 48 hours have said this specifically. Don't use Grok. And that's correct, right? You should be using any for-profit thing. If I had a way to talk to people on a regular basis about these things that was not Facebook, you better believe that I would be doing that. If I had a way to talk to people in any number that was not Twitter and these other things, for-profit abomination like a military-industrial complex abomination equally bad as those, like YouTube, you better believe that I would not be doing that. If you are working toward a revolutionary end using Grok as opposed to, say, something that you might not be able to do it as easily with, but that would be better, like Quen, open source large language model, less integrated with maybe your work. I'm not going to tell you that you can't use Twitter, right? While I'm on Twitter, I'm not going to tell you that you can't use Facebook while on Facebook, but it would be the bare minimum to at least say that. Again, 1 in 1,000 people on those platforms is doing anything that other than what is utterly worthless, less than worthless, part of the problem. But if you are a person who's not a part of the problem, it's not my place to tell you you shouldn't be using a cell phone. You shouldn't be using this. You shouldn't be using that. use the tools at your disposal. Um, but the real job is, of course, working toward the livable world, which requires those things: the raising of consciousness, the agitation, propaganda, the organizing toward the eruption. So vibe coding is something where you could go to your offline chatbot and say, offline chatbot, or Quen, I want to make an application that will get people more engaged with consciousness raising. And I have a concept for this application in mind, but I'm not a very good programmer. But now that I've described what this program does, what you tell me what to do next. And Quen will say, I understand. And then they'll say, cut and paste this into your notepad, cut and paste this into another notepad, cut and paste this into prompt, cut and paste this into a programming application. And when you do that some many thousands of times, then you have your application. You've just worked as a project manager with your digital assistant who is a computer programmer, even though no such person exists in your life. So that would be vibe coding, right? You didn't understand any of that code that you just copy and pasted, but nevertheless you just made some application that might have revolutionary significance if you're a cleverer person than I am. But an individual working towards something of revolutionary significance is not a revolutionary act. The revolutionary act involves some number of people. The more the better. And this principle has been something that's been on my mind for some years now. I would not be trying as best as I can to articulate the cybernetic communist project were that not so. And so I have tried to describe that not as an individualist project, but as something massified, the opposite of the thing corrupted by individualistic bourgeois philosophy. A low information engagement with that concept is a person who, like a person who protects financial capital by describing private property as the same as personal property, right? You steal my toothbrush. You want to steal my toothbrush. That doesn't even make sense. So state socialists have been better at protecting private property, by that definition, personal property, than bourgeois states. And a person who lies about that is just an unserious person. But that's almost every European American male, right? 1 in 1,000 are not people who should just be fired into the sun. Similarly, a person who confuses those two things that I just mentioned. This is going to about 49 minutes now. So because I don't have my notes, I thought I meant to pull up notes in the writing application, and I seem to have lost them. So I'm going to cut this short, except to say that you should be working on not just agitation, but eruption. And you should be working on eruption using the most powerful revolutionary weapon that's ever existed, advanced computing, as well as all the others, say more 19th or 20th century variety. And so this simple recognition that there are things other than 19th or 20th century tools is all that the cybernetic communist really has to add to the conversation over the scientific communist. And this is well understood. If you look at the body of work of the late 20th and early 21st century that would be described as neo-Marxist or post-Marxist or even post-modernist, again, the further that you would move in those from that neo-Marxist stance, the less coherent that work will tend to be. But overwhelmingly, all three of those kind of related disciplines are producing work that does relate to cybernetics, and even to the building of a humane and sustainable world using cybernetics. But what was not available to all of the writers prior to, let's say, Ben-Zionist cybernetic communist thought was the ability to articulate a specific path to a people's superintelligence using a specific thing, like an existing machine learning product, like an open source large language model. So they instead just tending to bloviate on the state of the world. Slavozizic, that's talking about a cultural thing in the context of cybernetics, and I'll talk about that for many pages because I don't have anything better to do. But you do have something better to do now because you can easily understand the building of a humane and sustainable world using the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, advanced computing, and the most available to the masses form of that incredibly powerful thing, advanced computing, would be open source large language models, which could be built into this massified workforce multiplier, which is not a difficult concept, right? You download a specially modified large language model, basically not different from the large language model as it exists, but some modifications that make it able to be networked and interoperating with other large language models that are networked and be steered by the same essential prompt mechanism that's built into the thing by users. And when you have all of that, and you have scaled that thing to many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, or even billions of users, you have a people superintelligence, a thing dramatically more capable than bourgeois formations, or I would contend even state socialist formations. A thing that could, with 1% of its power, with many millions of people, put sufficient pressure on the forces of the omnicide to stop the omnicide, and maybe use the other 99% of its power to do things of even more obvious utility than the mere stopping of a bad thing from happening. Maybe it takes more than 1% of its power. But the point is that a people's superintelligence would be a hell of a thing. And the building of the rudiments of a people's superintelligence would not be such a difficult thing. Any person, by vibe coding in the way that I described moments before, could undertake that project. And we will see not just the stopping of the capitalist climate apocalypse when that reaches that scale. We will see not just that, but wonders to behold beyond imagining, as I like to say in my mantra. So, for example, we could see the transitioning of existing state socialist or passively National Health Service type single-payer public health services into them being AGI powered and ASI powered, superintelligent powered. A superintelligent powered single-payer public health service could better treat ailments than we do today. And when all ailments are treated, that then moves to being a thing that is able to even treat decrepitude, the reversing of aging. And that outcome is one that would lead to universal super longevity. people living as long as they like. Not just a person who has $100 million in their bank, not just a person who's earmarked $15 million to spend. If you don't have $15 million to spend on life extension, don't expect to experience life extension effects in the 21st century under this bourgeois paradigm. But under this people's superintelligent paradigm and the people's superintelligent organization, that's a very different matter. So the mere stopping a bad thing from happening, moving to better things well beyond. I said 1% of the energies of the people's superintelligence could be enough to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse. That might be a lowball number, but I would say kind of the same thing about super longevity. That's a low expectation relative to what could be achieved by this thing that is credibly orders of magnitude more significant than the 19th or 20th century institution. The artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, very soon, my dear comrade, cybernetic communism will win. Thank you.